Fantastic. Okay, shall we get going then?
Oh, go for it, yeah.
Okay, so hi folks, thanks for taking the time to look at this. Clearly in the last few we've been doing, I've been absolutely doing the live thing. This is, I've introduced you via live, and this will be a recorded session with Ivor Cummins that I did yesterday, and you'll see that all in my next post. Anyway, Ivor is a giant in the sort of low carb movement. I've been a listener to him for many, many years now. I've recommended lots of you to go and sort of listen to his stuff. He's amongst his materials among a number of podcasts I've consistently recommended you look at. What we're not doing here, I'm not attempting yet again to sort of force you to look at keto or something like that. What we're doing here is talking about COVID-19 and how we might be able to best respond to that. Ivor, as I say, amazing guy, travels all around the world, presents all around the world, and amazing books, one of my favourite books, Eat Rich, Live Long. Can't recommend him enough. So here we have Ivor, and Ivor and I are just going to have a real good blather here. Let's see where it takes us. So Ivor, thanks for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. On behalf of my audience, I'm sure they're absolutely delighted we managed to get you to do this. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, no, thanks a lot, Jack. No problem. I'll enjoy it.
So do you want to sort of say something, Ivor, about your background and how you've fallen into this space where you've become one of the world leaders?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm biochemical engineering originally. So, and as a young person, I was always highly technical. You talked earlier about left and right brain. Well, I was kind of top of the class in English, but also top of the class in maths. So I was just lucky. I got two sides pretty okay. But there was no question. I was highly technical, went into engineering, biochemical, and then my career became dominated by being a technical problem-solving leader, sometimes with teams of up to over 50 engineers around the world on highly complex, kind of big lag time, subtle root cause problems. Ironically, not dissimilar from COVID in a sense, but no humans involved, but hundreds of millions of parts. So in 2012, the way I got into this was I got some poor blood test results, standard blood tests, came back. I wasn't ill, just got standard bloods. And I had very high liver enzyme and high serum ferritin and high cholesterol. And it all looked really huge. I could see the normal ranges for the liver and the ferritin, and I was way up. So long story short, that doctor and two doctors in the following few weeks, I wouldn't give up. I wanted to know the two key questions when you come upon a technical issue or are asked to resolve it. And the key questions are, what are the implications of the numbers? And the second one is, what influences the numbers? What are the root causes to make blood tests go up? And the docs couldn't answer properly. So I researched myself, and within a few weeks, I had remorselessly ended up with carbohydrate metabolism. So I had no bias. I just went after the three blood metrics, went after the mechanisms, the biochemistry, and all the human trial studies of the past 60, 70 years. I had access through my corporate to all the published peer-reviewed research. So I went with no bias, and I went after it. And within a few weeks, inexorably, I was at carbohydrate metabolism. And I immediately switched to a low carbohydrate diet, lots of healthy fats, eggs, meats, fish, vegetables, low starch. And within 9 weeks, my bloods were incredibly better. They were just fantastic. My blood pressure had collapsed within 2 weeks. My appetite had collapsed within 2 weeks, which was weird because I hadn't researched appetite. That was a bonus. And mental acuity. And basically, I lost 30 pounds as well over that 8 or 9 weeks, 2 stone. And essentially, I just realized, okay, when you do something that dramatic after researching properly, you've ticked the box. You were correct. As it happens, you were absolutely correct. That's it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you talked about, right at the beginning there, getting your blood test. Most of the people who will listen to this are probably UK residents with an NHS type of culture in their head. We very rarely go in and ask to get a blood test, and we don't really know about blood panels in terms of the average person ain't going to order up stuff, you know, a panel or something. that's maybe something you can do in Ireland, but we certainly don't find that easy here. So even sometimes, I mean, more recently, I've asked doctors to give, my doctor, if I've got a test or something, I've said, okay, going to give me a printout, and he does. But that wouldn't have been normal for me more recently to get a copy of the blood tests and understand what it is. So were you, because of your sort of engineering background, were you previously predisposed to the notion of wanting to check your blood and wanting to go and search what it would be? Or was that just because of the alarm that something wasn't quite right?
Well, actually, that was a routine blood test. So every couple of years, I'd get routine blood tests.
Yeah.
And I wasn't particularly, I was very focused on health. I used to do triathlons and everything, but I was very overweight. I could never understand that. Now I understand why. But no, that was routine blood tests. It was kind of connected to, I had a bicycle accident. I was knocked off my bike. I had to get a shoulder operation afterwards. And in conjunction with that, I ended up getting basic tests and stuff. But when I saw the results, you see, I was reading, the doctor was across the desk from me and had the printout, and I was reading upside down, scanning to see how high I was. And I could see upside down the reference ranges for, say, GGT were 20 to 55, and I was 110. And I could see ferritin was up to 260, and I was 512. So I immediately, my problem-solving technical leadership brain kicked in. I said, okay, this requires action, But in Ireland, briefly put, it's not totally dissimilar from England. The doctors don't give you printouts. If you ask for them, sometimes they're a little put out.
Yeah, exactly.
But they generally do. The testing is free. It goes into James's Hospital in Dublin or the other big test centers. And generally, they'll do a bunch of tests and they're covered. But you need to ask for, say, insulin or vitamin D often, or any of the other ones that are a little more exotic. But Ireland are great for doing the liver enzymes. And I've found out since that England and certainly America don't tend to do GGT, which is a super marker, a really important marker, but they don't tend to do it. But Ireland, for some reason, roll it in with the liver panel, which is great.
Wow. So the big thing that you're kind of, famous for in terms of just someone finding you somewhere, of listen to you on the 2 Kilo Dudes or something and go and find out who Ivor is, or the Fat Emperor, is this whole thing about getting CAC scans. Do you want to say something about that for the listeners as well? Because I've had this wonderful experience of a really good client of mine. We used to call them Mindstorm members. He's a guy who, brilliant, friendly man, a lovely man, great business. Got me into work with his business, came to my public stuff, went to Stuttgart where we got the clinic. And he eventually gave in with me after years and years of pushing low carb and keto, listen to something. He then asked for a chat with me on Skype. We had a blather. I said, look, you need to go and look at your fellow countrymen. Go and check out Ivor Cummins. Check out the Fat Emperor. And to be fair, he did. And he went seeking the CAC scan. And he found out he was, as you call it, he was living with a time bomb. And he now knows that he could have at any time, without any symptoms running up to it, he could have had a fatal heart attack. And he's now been through the open heart surgery. We've had communicated yesterday all over my Facebook page thing. Guy's a star. I hope to get him on here soon so folks can hear his story. But that's that's because of yourself and David Bobbitt, where I managed to I met him doing stuff with the Pendulum Summit a few years ago when it started. Him and I sat, I think we sat at the same table at one point. But when he was talking about that stuff, it was going over my head. I'm in the audience. He's getting passionate about it. We're all sort of, why is he so passionate about this thing? And it just didn't click. It was like, why would I do that? And here we are. So can you say a wee bit about that? Because it's so important, isn't it, the CAC scan?
Yeah, Jack, I mean, it's crucial. It is just central. And that's David's passion came from realizing many years ago, 8 years ago, how crucial it was and how underutilized. And that drives the passion because it could save millions of lives. But yes, he can be so passionate sometimes that he's just frustrated at not being able to get across the message.
I know the
So
feeling.
I've helped out for a few years now. David set up Irish Heart Disease Awareness, ihda.ie.
Yeah.
You can get
Yeah.
all the information there. But I probably remain more dispassionate. I am very passionate about this, but I know that to get the message across, you need to be really clear and data-centric. So essentially, the calcium scan, you go in, it's 5 minutes, a CT scan, machine whirs, not much more radiation than a mammogram. There's no risk from the radiation effectively. Costs a couple of $100, maybe. Some insurance covers it, some don't. But when you come out of that machine, you actually find out your genuine level of heart disease and your real risk. So
Yeah.
to give people an idea, no matter what age you are, pretty much, if you go in and get a 0, and 50% of middle-aged people are going to have a 0, your risk of a heart attack or death in the next 10 years is around 1%. It's
Right.
never 0 because there's electrical problems can cause heart attacks, other things not related to atherosclerosis, the main driver, but it's tiny. However, you come out with a very high score like David, up at 900, lots of those around too, your risk could be 20, 40% of a heart attack or death in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So it is the decider. And if you take all the middle risk people from the risk algorithms and the blood tests, you know, that fuzzy, vague, noisy risk guess, right? Most people are middle risk at middle age, which doesn't mean anything. I'm middle risk. What do I do? Well, if you scan all those people, 60 to 70% of them will get reallocated into genuine low risk or genuine high risk, super high. So it actually tells you who's at risk and allows you to then take action. And the most beautiful thing of all about this is David researched many years ago, and I've been doing it for 8 years. My God, you can take action. So by resolving the root causes, and there's a few primary ones that drive progression, if you have a high score, you can intervene. And if you resolve the root causes, very doable, your risk from that day onwards will begin to plummet down towards someone who had a 0 score and no issue in the first place.
Fantastic.
So this is the prize.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, in Ireland, what do? Do you just walk into your doctor and ask for it and pay for it? Or do you go to a private clinic? Because in the UK, you must have had people who follow you in the UK have gone and got it done. But I was attempting to get it done by talking to my doctor, then a cardiologist. The appointment was cancelled because of the current crisis. So what do? You just go to a private place and order it? Is that what you do?
Right. So in ihda.ie up the top, we've got the test centers page, and you get Ireland, UK, and all of America now and growing, all the test centers. So you can give them a call. In Ireland, the rule is you get a doctor's note, not a cardiologist. You do not need a cardiologist's appointment. A standard GP, you can get a note. And if the GP doesn't understand it, which is possible, or doesn't want to do it, doesn't like you, well, I always say to people, if you're middle-aged and a male over 40 or a woman over 50, it's in the new guidelines in America and Europe, right? So if the doctor is ignorant, well, just ask them to sign a brief note that they take responsibility if you have a major heart event in the next 10 years. Yeah, that'll soon wise them up, as they say. Yeah. But the key point is in Ireland, there's around 8 or 9 centres. They're mostly hospitals that have CT scanners, and they run this program on them to do a CAC scan. No big deal. And you go to the GP, you get your letter, and you go and get your test. In Ireland, the insurance companies are increasingly covering it. Some of them, many of them. Otherwise, it's around €300. In the UK, it's around 300 sterling and upwards. I've heard horror stories of 800. Okay. But again, look on ihda.ie for UK. Rivers Hospital north of London not only is the most reasonable cost, but they allow self-referral through filling out forms.
Okay.
But in general, the UK, you need a GP to tick the box and give you a nod because it's a real scan with a little radiation. Okay. And the US is mostly walk-in clinics where you walk in and pay $100. As low as $49.
Thank goodness. Lucky them. So tell me this then. Let's link this back to I mean, well, let's come back to something. The thing that excites me about you particularly is you found all of this, you articulate it so well. You're not a doctor, but you probably know more about it than the average GP, which is similar to what we were talking about last week with Klaus in terms of what they know about cancer versus what the average oncologist even knows. Is quite amazing. But the thing is, what is so you've figured out some ways that are highly affected of almost backing out of this crisis in your life. Yep. And there's also, I've heard you say it in the last few weeks repeatedly, differently, there's similarities to how you might strengthen yourself to deal with COVID-19. Do you want to sort of roll into that type of chat now for people? Because I think they're going to be quite excited by what you're saying, and this is why I wanted to reach out to you.
Yeah, great, Jack. So that's a big topic, but I'll try and parse it out. So just to get out of the way first, the heart disease aspect, yeah, there's no question now. The primary drivers of heart disease around the world, without any real question, are hyperglycemia, high blood glucose, hyperinsulinemia, high blood insulin, hyperleptinemia. We won't get into leptin much, but it's like insulin, it's extremely important, and insulin resistance. Type 2 diabetes physiology. So that's the massive driver of cardiac disease. And we find that in Europe, in the EuroAspire study, are over 75% of cardiac victims or patients ages 18 to 80 across 25 countries, when they look closely, over 70% are essentially diabetic, right? Wow. 50% full-blown, and another 25% clearly diabetic, not quite full-blown. And the remaining 20% odd, they didn't measure with insulin. So you're going to have a load more in there. So that's the big message. If you just deal with diabetic dysfunction, glucose insulin imbalance, you'll have addressed the lion's share of cardiac risk. Not all of it, because you've also got vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Yep. You've also got oxidative stress. And vegetable oil consumption, driving problems with oxidation of your cholesterol particles. There's a bunch of other stuff, but what I said is the big one. So if you address that, you are addressing the causes that drive the progression of calcification. And what you will see, and we're seeing all over the world, and there's a couple of published studies, you can slow down the progression rate per annum of this calcification. Yeah. And the calcification is a repair process driven by the inflammation of your blood vessels. It's there to try and protect you. But if you fix the cause, the calcification stops growing or slows down, and the risk plummets. So that's heart disease. So in a nutshell, low carb diets, because most people with a heart disease problem are essentially diabetic. So of course you got to be low carb. Anything else is absurd. Magnesium, potassium, UV exposure from healthy sun for nitric oxide for the vessel's health, and a few other things, bit of fasting, etc. You do all those good things and a few more, generally you'll slow the progression and your risk will plummet. And someone who has 1,000 score today, who has a risk of say 30% on paper, well, if they drop that down, not below 1,000, but if they next year after taking action are only 1,040 and the year after 1,080, and they've slowed it down instead of letting it go 1,200, 1,400, etc., their risk is almost like they pushed it back towards zero. Right. So that's huge. Now, I could get on to COVID now, if you want.
Yeah, let's wander in there. Because I think I've listened to you lots of times. As I say, I've put a lot of hours into this, but I know my audience haven't, and a lot of them are. I think it's like a lot of things. People hear me pushing this at them. They kind of trust me because I've been going on my programs, but they hear this. It's like, do I really want to go and find out if there's something wrong, or do I really want to be challenged by a paradigm that's completely opposite to how I've been living my life, from the notion of being healthy, and I've been following a healthy diet, the classic diet we all thought was healthy for the last 50 years, turns out to be maybe it isn't. Maybe you could do a wee link there into COVID, and we'll see where we go for the rest of the call. I want to maximise the audience's ability to learn from you.
Yeah, okay. So diet. So essentially, it can be simplified for the audience. I'm not being patronizing here, but I often simplify diet to the triad. So the triad, or three really Satan's ingredients in diet that drive modern chronic disease, are pretty simple. Sugar, refined carbohydrates, and modern factory fake fats, seed oils, vegetable oils, high temperature, pressure, kind of almost manufactured chemicals. So those three things, sugar, refined carb, and seed oils, they make up most of ultra processed food. And in the UK, well over 50% of people's calories in the last decade or more come from ultra processed foods. And they're mostly made up of the triad I mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay. The key thing is that these foods, ultra processed, they're not really bad because of the E numbers or the colors or all the other stuff that people were suspicious about. Yeah. It's because they're packed with those three ingredients. The reason they're packed with them is those three ingredients are literally dirt cheap for the food manufacturers. So if you want to put in real healthy fats from real foods like meat or eggs, those things don't really have the shelf life. They're not practical and they're expensive. So the ultra processed foods are the cornerstone of modern chronic disease. Those three components are the key things that make them bad. And they're in there because they're dirt cheap. And if you mix them in the right combinations with some other stuff, you make hyper palatable food that causes people to overeat and get even more diseased. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell. So if that's what the really bad food is, well, then take all of that away and you should be left with pretty good food. And you are. Because if you take away all the ultra processed food and those ingredients, you're left with meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, olives, avocado, nuts, seeds. You're left with real foods. So the simplest thing for people is to remove everything bad and just be left with good stuff. Now, there's a little extra thing people need to know. If we were all metabolically healthy and had never been damaged by the fake foods I mentioned, if we were all healthy, we could actually eat quite a lot of real food carbohydrates, quite a lot of potatoes, quite a lot of vegetables and tubers that are quite high starch. Yeah, we could. But there's a problem. When your population is at this stage mostly diabetic and metabolically damaged with hyperglycemia, high insulin, high leptin, that's happened now. Our population is now metabolically damaged. Yeah. And in that population, that is a reality now. You need to go a little further than just real food. You need to go to lower carb real food, because we now have a majority of adults carbohydrate intolerant. Yeah. So this often confuses people and they say, oh, but the Irish ate potatoes and they didn't get diabetic. They didn't get heart attacks. No, they didn't. They were eating game, fish, tons of dairy for thousands of years, loads of real food, and they were eating potatoes. They were out in the sun, working hard. Load of factors together meant potatoes were fine. Yeah. Potatoes aren't fine for a middle-aged office worker now. No. No way. They're not fine anymore. That's the challenge. So that might help people understand the reason for low carb now and keto for the most afflicted is not because all humans always needed keto. It's not. It's because the modern population, the very people who are at risk for heart disease, who are obese or at risk for obesity, the very people who matter most, the TOFIs, the thin outside but fat inside with fat in their liver and pancreas, who have huge risk. All of those people who need help most are all pretty much carbohydrate intolerant. So that's why we need low carb now in this age.
Yeah. Can you just clarify briefly before we move to the COVID thing about, because people hear things like sugar and processed carbohydrates, but in terms of, so you itemize some of the good foods, the whole foods, the obvious ones, the eggs, the cheese and so on, and the meat, the fish, avocados, etc. But what about the food that falls into the sugar category and processed carbs? Could you just maybe litter the next few minutes with some of them? Because I don't think people realise certain things actually are sugar, if you know what I'm getting at. You know, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and Dr. David Unwin in the UK is fantastic for this. He takes all the foods and converts them into the equivalent of teaspoons of sugar.
Amazing.
So what's high sugar foods that you should, unless you're super healthy, insulin sensitive, athletic, which is not many people, what are the foods you got to be really careful with? Well, breads are a classic example. Ultra refined carbohydrate with factory fake oils, refined grains, even whole wheat bread. They add back in some color and fiber, but it's essentially ultra refined carbohydrate. So breads are a classic example of a super bad food for a modern average person.
Right.
Okay? Pastas. The original Italian pasta 50, 60 years ago had a hell of a lot of egg protein in it, which slowed down the absorption of the refined carbohydrate and grains. But modern pastas, they're just pure junk because they're made with the cheapest ingredients. So all they are is ultra refined carbohydrate and factory seed oils. Very little egg. So they're a disaster. Fruits. Now, this is a contentious one, and I'm going to be careful with this, to be honest, Jack.
I know.
For a modern person who's got diabetic physiology, which is the majority of modern middle-aged, if you eat berries, blueberries, strawberries, and things like this, they're relatively low sugar, relatively high fiber, and relatively nutrient dense. Not nutrient dense, but they got nutrients. But I mean, the apples and oranges and bananas have been bred for a century or more to be as sweet as they can possibly get them. So they'll sell more, right? I mean, it's competitive business. So those fruits are not the friend of a modern middle-aged office worker, you know. A traditional person living on an island, super slim and healthy in the sun, might eat quite a few of those, no problem. But let's be honest, to my earlier point, we're talking about the people in the Western world who are at risk. They are carbohydrate intolerant. They should eat low sugar berry fruits with reasonable moderation. So breads, pastas, high sugar fruits, obviously all the processed foods in the supermarket are just stuffed with refined carb and vegetable oils, so you can write them all off. Except I made an exception for Tesco, and I went through it in a podcast the other day with Dr. Asim Malhotra. Our local Tesco now has ready meals that are convenient, super fast, and when you look at the ingredients, all that's in them really is meat and vegetables, maybe a bit of flavor. So you can, and they're very cheap, so you can get cheap packet food of sorts, but it's a real meal just put in a foil tray. So that's okay. But most of everything else, read the back: sugar, refined carbs, processed vegetable oils. And the clever trick they do is they call something a few different things and they spread it out in the ingredient lists. So you got to be careful. But generally,
So one of the things you've said, and a lot of people who come and listen don't maybe get the connection. We talk about pre-diabetic or diabetic. And most people are going to say, well, he's talking about diabetics. I'm not a diabetic. Even though they're eating all the food you've just suggested they shouldn't be eating. And well, that's not for me. I don't have to just turn off now. I don't need to listen to this. But tell us something about the percentage. And before I ask you this question, can I just say this to the audience? If you were going to send a human being to go and look at all the research for you, you'd want Ivor to do it because he's got this amazing brain of an engineer. He'll reverse himself out of understanding everything about it and has this ability to explain it. And what I love about it is some of the stuff you talk about goes right over my head, and I let it go over my head because when you get to the sort of solution or you get to the explanation, I'm suddenly back on again. And I want people, because I drive my car, I kind of a bit of a BMW guy. I have no idea what happens underneath the bonnet. Not a clue, but I know how to drive it. I don't really need to know the ins and outs of all the unbelievable science. And I spent 2,000 of hours listening to the science. Still goes over my head. It's what it means for me that's allowed me to capture the control of my health now and why I'm so passionate about it. But maybe you could just say something about that people maybe think, well, it's not me. I'm not big and fat and obese, therefore I don't have pre-diabetes or whatever. Could you say a wee bit about that? Then roll into the COVID.
Yeah, sure, Jack. And it's a really important point. You're right. People, not through any fault of their own, they just have no idea really what you just said. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that any plump middle-aged person out there who says they're not diabetic, the huge probability is they're wrong.
Yes.
So if you show me your insulin and glucose readings and I put them into a HOMA calculator, so people can Google HOMA calculator, 2 words, and you've got your calculator there where you put in your blood insulin, fasting, and your blood glucose. And you should be below 1.2 or below 1. And most of the people, Jack, you just said there, who think they're not diabetic, I'd be very surprised in most cases, because if you're over 1.8, you're insulin resistant, which is type 2 diabetes. So to give figures, these are the actual figures now, so everyone should be sitting down before they hear them. In America, and UK is not a mile behind this, we just don't have the data as good, but in America, recent reports show that for over 45s, adults, 64% are now pre-diabetic or diabetic. So just by glucose measurements, which are not really that great, if you measured insulin, it'd be 75 or more percent easily. But just by glucose measurement, 2/3 of over 45s are now pre or diabetic. And another really important thing for people to know is pre-diabetic is diabetic type 2. So they call it pre, but the threshold they put to call it full-blown is so ridiculously high that people who are full-blown type 2 would have been diabetic 20 years before. So it's a false category. So in short, 64% of over 45s in America are now type 2 diabetic, okay? And more would be if you measured their insulin or leptin, which we don't do. So that'll give people the scale. UK is not quite as bad, but to be honest, I have a very good friend who's a doctor in the Asian community, and he has 70,000 people, I think, in his wider area he covers. And he said essentially all of the Asian population he supports who are in their 50s or 60s or over are essentially diabetic. Wow. And he said practically all. And, you know, this problem of diabetic type 2 dysfunction, it's something that always gets worse with age. And in the old days, a couple of 100 years ago, you're going to get a certain amount who are older who would have it, very low percentages. It's gone up by a factor of God knows what. And now you got to be lucky to avoid diabetes in your 60s. And our youngest type 2 diabetic is now 3 years old.
Jeez.
And it used to be adult onset diabetes, type 2. Adult onset, because no way would you get it before being an adult middle-aged. Now we have 3-year-olds. We have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes in teenagers in America. So people need to grasp how widespread it is. It is everywhere. We are a diabetic society now. Put it in another way, we are a carb intolerant society now.
And the point is, before we move into the COVID, is that we can reverse out of this. That's the beautiful thing. And we can reverse out of it relatively quickly. So that solution also falls into listening to you, particularly over the last few weeks. Your podcasts have been phenomenal. And I've been asking people to go and listen to them. Do you want to say something about the COVID thing and the sort of where your head's at with that? What you and all your sort of colleagues around the world, your network, shall we say, of people who are very interested in this and knowledgeable. Where's your head with it now? And what can we do to maximize our ability to sort of maybe fight it off when it does show up? Because it would suggest maybe herd immunity or whatever that thing is, that maybe this flu, whatever it is we're all going to get it at some point perhaps, and therefore we want to be able to deal with it. Any thoughts there? Could you take us there for a while?
Yeah, well, for sure, Jack. And up front, I've been looking at the data because that's what I always do. And I'm very interested in this phenomenon. I think there's been it's very tragic. It's certainly more severe than the flu. It's being debated how much more severe, but it's more severe. And it's particularly hitting the over 70s and care homes. So I think in Ireland, 60% of the deaths so far, and we're already coming out of it, but 60% or so are in care homes.
Yeah.
And if you look at the risk factor for COVID death, it's enormously stacked towards over 75s. I mean, enormously stacked.
Yeah.
There are younger people, but then when you look at younger people, the much lower numbers of deaths, they're almost all have comorbidities or other issues like diabetes and many other issues. So people need to understand it's hugely stacked towards the older, just like a flu would be. And the other thing is that it's not just being older that's a risk. It's older people have more metabolic disease, more diabetes, more leptin resistance, all the things I mentioned. So if you forget about the age for a moment, and you look at it more that the risk is all related to your metabolic health. And COVID, essentially the reason it's quite tough is because your innate immune system overreacts. And people can think of it that in trying to attack this disease, your innate immune system, which is also called your metabolic immune system, and we'll come to that in a moment, it overreacts with a cytokine storm. So it sends out masses of troops firing their machine guns all over the place. And sure, that kills some viruses, but it also sadly kills you in a sense. So this overreaction. And the biggest thing that we can identify relating to why that happens is metabolic disease, which means your immune system is going to be completely poor in signaling. It will not hit hard where it should hit hard. We have papers proving this in diabetic or insulin resistant people or leptin resistant, and it will overreact where it should not overreact. Okay. Right. So the biggest thing to ensure for you to have a mild outcome and not die tragically, all of that, there's no question about it, really, is to be as insulin sensitive and as healthy as possible, which means your immune system will be as effective as it should be, in which case you're very likely to have no major problem. Now, if we look briefly to reinforce what I said, I have interviews from a few weeks ago with a viral specialist doctor who was dealing with COVID patients. And he was interviewed on the news and he was literally shocked. Why was he shocked? Well, he was shocked because he said, almost every one of my serious cases is pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Yeah.
In fact, except for one who's a 94-year-old man, and we're not even sure he has it. He said of the ICU cases, pretty much all diabetic, pre-diabetic. He said, I've never seen the extent of diabetes, right, in a disease like this in my career. And I'm asking my colleagues about it. It's unbelievable. And he was visibly shocked. So that'll tell people how intimately this is connected to diabetes, insulin resistance, hypertension, all the things they're seeing correlate. It's intimate. Now, you mentioned, Jack, but can you do something about this? And how quick is it? Well, I've done many interviews on that with doctors in the last few weeks. And I would say when you switch to the foods we're talking about and do a bit of fasting, not much, just go to a couple of meals a day instead of your usual 4, back off, eat real food, get nutrient density in there. Within a day, your blood glucose and insulin will start dropping fast. Within a day.
That's phenomenal.
Within a week, they're going to be down a ton. And within a week or two, generally speaking, your whole physiology is going to be massively recovering and your immune system is going to be recovering with it. So there's no guarantees, but I met a doctor in Denver last month, lovely man, an Asian extraction man, Indian extraction, Raj, and he was all excited and he met me. He said, 6 months ago, Ivor, I discovered your stuff and I did it. You know how quickly I made my diabetes effectively go away by blood measurements? I says, well, what, like a couple of weeks? Should be possible. 10 days. Wow. He did his own blood measurements 10 days after starting. Wow. And he was no longer diabetic. Now, Virta Health have done 400 type 2 diabetics, and if 60% become non-diabetic within a year of a keto low-carb diet, no calorie control, just an app on the phone and stick to a proper real food diet. 4% dropped their medications or reduced them, right? And their blood sugars had come down mostly to non-diabetic levels. So we know this can be done. There are publications everywhere. Anyone can do it. It's not even hard.
Yeah.
Technically, not hard.
And you can, and of course, the thing about low carb diets and lifestyle, you can do it. You can do it whether you're at an extreme of carnivore, let's say, and to vegan. You can anywhere in that spectrum. You can follow this. It's so encouraging.
Yeah, we have a vegan psychiatrist in our Irish group, medical group, and pulling her hair out because she said nearly all her depression patients are insulin resistant. They're not diagnosed type 2 diabetic, but she knows they are. And it's so frustrating. But she's a vegan. She's a low carb vegan. No problem. Now, it's a little trickier.
Yeah.
It's easier for carnivore, obviously. But like you say, yeah, of course you can do it. Anyone can do it. And if you just eat real food alone, you'll tend to end up on a low carb diet without knowing it.
Yeah, cool. Can you say something about, we're going to reverse back a little bit, because whenever I've talked about keto or had the chance to explain it to someone who's open-minded, very often they're not open-minded, you get run into this issue about, but you're going to increase your, you're going to have heart disease, and you know where I'm heading. But could you say something about that for, say, 2 or 3 minutes? And one of the things I want to capture you on, because I'm aware of the time ticking away, is on one of your podcasts, you were talking about egg yolk sort of omelets, and you kept the white back because you wanted a glass of wine in the evening. Now that quite excited me, and will for a lot of the people who trusted me to go and listen, because sometimes when you look at it, you think, well, I can't have a glass of wine, I can't have a glass of Irish whiskey or something. But maybe you could just throw that little tease in, which might help some people. Yeah.
Okie doke. Yeah. So the first part which you were saying was, let me just get this right. The first part was about people who say that it could be unhealthy. So I often quip, are those people stupid or evil or both? So a lot of research and a lot of work has gone in, billions of dollars over the last 40 years, trying to prove that the real foods with higher fat content were bad, and they all failed. So they wasted billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right? They all failed. There isn't a shred of credible evidence. So that's the first thing. So why did they say it? And the reason they say it is quite simple, because all of professional pride cannot face being wrong. So they kept trying to prove that they were right and eventually gave up. Yeah. But they can't admit they were wrong because it's unthinkable. All the politicians, all the professors, the illustrious professors of nutrition, all these people have their whole careers for decades saying fat's bad and carbs good. They can never face that they were wrong. So that's why and the other thing is that industry, of course, fell in absolute love with the low-fat diet 30 years ago, because sugar, refined carbs, and vegetable oils are the cheapest dirt products or ingredients on the market. So they became completely addicted, right, to this false scientific paradigm. So they didn't create it. There's no conspiracy. The companies and corporations didn't create it, but they've certainly helped keep the false paradigm alive, as I would. Of course you would. It's a gold mine. Yeah. So there's that. So what happens is, if you eat real foods that are higher fat, your LDL cholesterol might go up. Some people it does. The LDL cholesterol on its own, being up or down, is a meaningless risk factor. If you back out everything else, LDL is quite literally meaningless on its own. So if you take a gentleman in the UK, middle-aged, 50 years old, and that gentleman has an LDL of 5 millimoles, or around 200 milligrams, but 5 millimoles in UK units, LDL, and a total cholesterol of 8 millimoles. Now that 50-year-old man, you'd say, wow, he's a heart attack waiting to happen. Of course, any doctor would say that.
Yeah.
You put that guy into the 5 world's risk algorithms with that massive LDL, but you also put them in not having hypertension, not having diabetes, not having blah, 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 and having a high HDL. All of those things means he's not insulin resistant. Well, if you do that, he comes out as low risk in all the world's algorithms. And if he gets a calcium scan and gets a 0, which most of them will, right, then he's ultra low risk, the lowest risk a human can be for heart disease. So people need to realize LDL on its own is meaningless, but LDL on its own going up is all they talk about when they talk about health, which is obviously a farce. So on the second thing, the wine. Yeah, everything in life is a trade-off, and everything links to everything else. So if you enjoy your wine in the evening, what I do is I generally eat one meal a day. I eat a meaty, fatty meal in the evening with some carb too, maybe a potato or two, but mostly fat and protein. And I have a big meal. But I don't overeat at other times because I have to, in fairness, allow for the calories. I enjoy my wine.
Yeah, good man.
So all I'm doing is balancing. And if I'm out at night in a restaurant and I eat a ton and have loads of wine with my friends, a great night, well, the next day I'll counteract that by not eating at all until maybe 6 p.m. So it's not calories that causes obesity really, but still calories count for something. So you're going to trade off. But if you're low carb, healthy, real foods, this is the crucial key. Your appetite is so controllable that you can easily manage your intake.
You're right.
But if you're eating a high carb food pyramid diet, you lose the steering wheel. You lose the controls. You will now find yourself grazing and drawn to the food. That's what's happened to the modern population. The type of food dictates whether you tend to overeat. And that's the tragedy.
And do you, just because I'm interested, do you steer towards organic wines, or, you know, are you looking at keto type wines, or are you not bothered? You just have what you enjoy?
I have Rioja mainly is my favorite, but because they're dry red wines, they're not really high sugar, and I'm not obsessive enough to try and find low sugar wines. Wines as well. Organic, the vegetables I know with the sprays and all, I'm a little leery about. So we buy the organic vegetables. The wine, I reckon, from what's in wine and alcohol, I don't think it'd be as important. So only the vegetables really, and meat, grass-fed meat, and organic's nice, but I haven't really worried too much about the wine, no.
So the only obvious other thing that comes along when we look at this is, you know, the thing about diet, which we've kind of talked about, and then there's also the notion of good sleep and exercise. Any sort of little guidance there that you've picked up from the experts that you tend to spend your time with?
Yeah, well, actually, we did a lovely diagram, myself and Dr. Gerber, in Eat Rich, Live Long, and we show wedge is type 2 diabetic, and the other end is truly insulin sensitive, healthy, non-diabetic, and we put in all the big factors. So no sugar, no refined carb, no vegetable oils is the big end of the wedge. Eliminate. We have red crosses. Then you've got low carb, higher protein, nutrient dense diet generally. And then we put fasting behavior, not like long-term fasts, but going to 2 meals a day, meal skipping along with the healthy diet, it'll be easy. That's a healthy thing. And then we have the 4 S's. So I'll see if I can remember them from a long time back. So sleep, stress, supplements, and sleep, stress, supplements. Can't remember the 4th one. I'm pretty sure there were 4. But yes, sleep. Poor sleep. They did a study on humans, and they denied them sleep and got them to 4 hours a night instead of the usual 6.5, 7. And in a couple of weeks, their insulin sensitivity had halved just based on sleep. Poor sleep also causes you to eat junk food more so, and it directly affects your cortisol and your blood glucose. So sleep, look, it can be hard sometimes to get good sleep if you're under pressure, but it's certainly an important factor. Stress, it's fine to get really worked up a couple of times a day, get aggressive, that's normal. But constant background stress, worry, destroys your insulin and glucose dynamics as well.
Of course.
And then we've got sleep supplements, magnesium, potassium, iodine's important, and selenium maybe, and vitamin K2. MK7, and UV I think of as a supplement. Sun, that was the fourth S.
Yeah.
I consider sun to be the most powerful supplement almost of all, because people might not realize when you go out in the sun or even a UV lamp, it's better than taking vitamin D tablets by a mile,
Yeah.
because the main thing that happens is in the sun is your skin makes vitamin D. That's really important, but your skin makes nitric oxide, and that's a massive health boost for your arterial network. Nitric oxide makes a huge difference, and many other benefits too.
Yeah.
So, and there's three more photochemicals that the sun makes in your skin, your body makes, and they don't even know what they do yet. But you know what, Jack? I bet you they do something important, or evolution wouldn't have made them.
Hi,
So,
people
the sun.
listening to this and following me will know that we talked about this last week with Klaus, who runs the Alternative Cancer Clinic. And Dr. Joanna Budvig, she was big on getting out in the sunshine, and we were talking about that. So that's a great affirmation, folks, for just what you've heard from Ivor, what he's saying there, and the link back to last week. Anything else, Ivor, that you might just want to? We're getting up to about 6 minutes if we're running for an hour. So anything you would like to add?
I do actually, Jack, and it's a great way to wrap it up, I think. So we've just released a new movie, and it's been a year and a half in the making. Substantial funding from Irish Heart Disease Awareness and David Bobbitt to help us, but we also need to claw back a bit. We kind of went over budget, but we scanned with the CAC scan I mentioned 45 Irish sporting heroes from a big final in 1991 between Meath and Down.
Right.
And this has never been done before. And we got, they were all presumed to be healthy, and we were wondering what would happen. All their doctors themselves, no problem, no need for any intervention. They're all healthy. Well, 9 of them had super high calcium scores and all needed follow-up with cardiology. One had an event in the following months before they managed to get him in for his bypass. Even though they had decided he needed a bypass, he actually had a heart event. Another one had a multiple way bypass, urgently required, and the others are getting care now as well. So that'll give people an idea. Out of 45 healthy 50-something-year-olds, sportsmen, ex-sportsmen, and that happened. But the really big thing about this movie, and it's very entertaining, and it'll tell you a huge amount about what we talked about. We followed one of the guys who did everything that we were talking about at the start. He got a blood glucose meter. He cut out all the crap. He took fish oil, vitamin D. He took magnesium, K2, did all the stuff because he had a super high score. And in the movie, you'll find out what happened a year later. Did he succeed in massively impacting his disease that we showed him he had? Well, you'll find out. But it's a really good story. I don't want to give it away, but it's a hero's journey for a second time. And that's at extratimemovie.com. That's one word, extratimemovie.com, $3.99. And you'd be really helping us if you go on and watch that movie and share it, if possible, with friends. And it really tells you everything in a very entertaining format.
Fantastic, fantastic. And people can find you on YouTube. They can find you wherever they get podcasts. Behind you there's the Fat Emperor. That's how they find you, presumably, yeah?
Google Ivor Cummins or Google Ivor Cummins Fat Emperor. What you're going to hit my YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and thefatemperor.com in the first page. Masses of links. Or you can also search Ivor Cummins on a topic, a health topic, or do things like that. And you might hit quickly on podcasts that relate to that. Yeah.
No, excellent. I mean, one of the things that I found very helpful in the beginning when I first came across this, I came across Jimmy Moore, and then he just starts. Are there any other podcasts and/or YouTube channels you would recommend for people to skip around so they can? Because you know all the leading guys. Is there anything you would recommend that's really exciting?
Well, I'm just thinking the podcast. Well, there's my buddies, Dr. Brian Lenskes. I think it's Lenskes in San Diego, and Tro Kajalian. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but they have, I think, the Low Carb Docs podcast is pretty hot. You got Sean Baker's podcast, SHAWN. That's carnivore, if you want to
big
look
fan.
at that. And there's so many. I mean, Vinny Torchurch's podcast. But the best thing is to Google low carb podcast with 3 words. And I think you'll hit a lot of the people that I'm close to.
So for the vegetarians and vegans who get a little bit upset about people like me who might occasionally experiment with carnivore, any decent podcast that might help them, or anything you could point them towards, or any particular name you know who's quite good at sort of explaining it from their perspective?
Well, that's great, because you reminded me of dietdoctor.com, all
Yes,
one word.
yes,
So
yes.
Andreas Einfeld, a doctor in
Yep,
Sweden, is
yep,
the biggest website in the world for low carb healthy food. And the
yep.
good thing is, if you go in there and search vegetarian and vegan, they've done a lot of good features on how you do healthy lower carb living for modern people when you're a vegetarian or a vegan. So I think that's really good. And there's not too many people doing that. So dietdoctor.com, and search around there or subscribe, and they cover for everyone to achieve better health
Yeah.
through healthy, nutrient dense diets, whether you're a vegan, a vegetarian, or even one of this new breeds, the carnivores, who are quite amusing to me. But they've got some really interesting science as well. I mean, stuff I didn't know already. I was surprised. The carnivores are doing research, MD carnivores, and
Yeah.
are coming out with some fascinating information around diet and health. It's groundbreaking.
It does fascinate me. Yeah, I've played around with it. It's amazing. But anyway, Ivor, I can't thank you enough, and I'm sure everybody who's going to see this is going to be absolutely delighted that we managed to get you, and that you agreed to come on. Listen, I kind of wish you every success with everything you're doing. You know, you're a giant out there. It's great for us to hear a voice that isn't necessarily American, you know, just because it tends to be. So well done.
Thanks a lot, Jack. And to be honest, well, I'm very busy, so not any time, but certainly give us a shout again for some update or whatever. And I can always squeeze in these because I have zero preparation required, and that's the key thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, technically, I was born in London, so I'm Irish, obviously, but I have a little link to the UK.
Good man. Listen, thanks again, Ivor. Wonderful. See you again. Thank
Right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye now, Jack. Bye.
Bye.